Chapter 1. My story begins, my name is John Ridd, and I am a farmer. I live in the village of Orr, in the county of Somerset. Orr is on Exmoor, a wild part of Somerset. The Ridds have been farmers here for hundreds of years. My story begins in the town of Tiverton, in November 1673. I was 12 years old then, and I was living at my school. I lived at the school for most of the year, but I went home for the holidays. It was 5 o'clock on the afternoon of the 29th of November. There were no more lessons that day. I was standing by the school door. Suddenly I saw Jan Fry. Jan worked on our farm at Orr, but that afternoon he was waiting outside the school gates. He was sitting on his horse, and my horse was standing beside his horse. "Why are you here today, John?" I asked him. "The school holiday will begin in 2 weeks' time." "Yes, I know that, Master John," he said quietly. "But you must come home tomorrow. I will stay here tonight. We will start our journey in the morning." "But why have you come for me, John?" I asked him. "My father always takes me home from school at the beginning of the holiday. Why isn't Father here?" John did not look at me. He's very busy today," he replied. But I did not believe him. The journey from Tiverton to Orr was difficult and long. At noon we stopped at the town of Dulverton. We had a meal there, and our horses rested for an hour. Then we continued our journey. Outside Dulverton, we saw a fine coach. 4 horses were pulling it, and 3 people were sitting inside it. One of these people was a woman with black hair and dark eyes. Next to her sat a pretty little girl with long dark hair. The third person in the coach was a lady, a very beautiful lady. She was wearing fine clothes. Who are those people? I asked myself. Is the black-haired woman a servant? And is the pretty little girl the beautiful lady's daughter? In the afternoon, thick fog came down. We could not see the road clearly. Everything was silent. But Jan and I rode on across the moor. After some time, Jan spoke. "We must be very quiet now, Master John," he said, and I knew the reason for this. We were near our home, but we were also near Dune Valley. The Dunes were terrible people. They were a family of robbers and murderers. They lived in a lonely valley on Exmoor, and their valley was a dangerous place. After a few minutes, Jan spoke again. "Master John, I must tell you something," he said. "Your father is dead. The Dunes have killed him. Get off your horse, Master John. We must hide." Suddenly the fog went away. "The Dunes, who did they rob today?" I thought. One rider was holding a child, a little girl. She was wearing a fine dress. I could not see her face, but she was unhappy. She was crying. Suddenly I was angry. I stood up and I shouted at the riders. 2 of the men turned and looked at me. One of them pointed his gun at me, but the other man put his hand on his friend's arm, and after a moment, the men rode on. "You were very foolish, Master John," Jan said. "The Dunes are dangerous men." We rode on to our farm. We got off our horses, but my father did not come out of the house. Then I heard my mother crying, and then I knew everything. My father was dead. Chapter 2. The Dunes. The Dunes had murdered my father. That evening, Jan Fry told me about it. Father had been returning to Orr from Porlock with 6 other farmers. Early in the morning, they were riding through a forest. Suddenly, a man rode out of the trees. He was one of the Doones. "Give me all your money," the man said to the farmers. The other farmers were afraid of the Doones. They quickly gave the man their money, but Father was not afraid. He rode his horse towards the man, and he lifted his stick. At that moment there was a shout, and 12 more Doones rode out of the trees. My father was a brave man, and he tried to fight the Doones, but one of them, Carver Doone, had a gun. He shot my father and killed him. After my father's funeral, my mother went to Doone Valley. There was a high wall at the end of the valley, and there was a gate in the wall, the Doone Gate. 2 men always guarded the gate. My mother spoke to the guards. "Take me to Sir Ensor Doone," she said. One of the guards took my mother to Sir Ensor's house in the valley. Sir Ensor Doone was the head of the Doone family. He was a very old man. "Why have you come here, Mrs. Ridd?" Sir Ensor asked my mother. "One of your men killed my husband," my mother replied. "Do you know about this?" "My men are sometimes wild," Sir Ensor said, "but they don't kill people. I don't believe your story." The old man went to the door of the house, and he shouted to someone. After a minute, another person came in. He was a gray-haired man with a long beard. "Listen to this woman's story," Sir Ensor said. Mother told the story again. "That story is not true," said the gray-haired man. 4 of our young men went to Porlock that day. Only 4. Some farmers attacked them in the forest. One of the farmers, a big, strong man, knocked 3 of our men to the ground. He was going to kill them. Then Carver used his gun. He had to kill the farmer. Sir Ensor Doone believed the man's story. My mother returned home sadly. After my father's death, I did not go back to school. I lived on the farm with my mother and my sister Annie. But I took my father's gun and I used it every day. After a few weeks, I could shoot well. Everybody was frightened of the Doones. Carver Doone had killed my father, but nobody had punished him. One day I will kill him, I said to myself. Many years later, I heard more about the Doones. Sir Ensor Doone had come to Exmoor from Scotland in 1640. Before that, Sir Ensor and his cousin, Lord Dougal, had owned a lot of land in Scotland. But the 2 men were not friends. They argued about the land. They went to the law courts in London. There was a trial, and Sir Ensor lost all his land. After the trial, Sir Ensor and his family came to Exmoor. They built their houses in a lonely valley. At first, there were only 12 Doones, and at first, the farmers of Exmoor were their friends. The farmers took them food. They tried to help the family. But soon, Sir Ensor's sons grew big and strong. Then they began to steal from the farmers. They stole their animals, and sometimes they stole the farmers' daughters too. They took the girls and married them. Soon, everybody on Exmoor hated the Doones. Chapter 3. Lorna. In February 1676, I was 14 years old, and one sunny February afternoon, I went fishing. The Lynn River passed near our farm, and 2 miles from the farm, Bagworthy Water and the Lynn River joined together. That was a good place for fishing. I often caught loach there. Loach are small, delicious fish. We all like to eat them. That February afternoon, I went to my fishing place and I sat on the riverbank, but I was not lucky. After 2 hours, I had not caught any fish. I got up and I began to walk along the bank of the Lynn River. I was walking towards Dune Valley. After a mile, the banks of the river were very steep. Then I had to walk in the water. The water was very cold under the dark trees. But soon, I caught a few loach. After that, I walked on again, along the river. After another mile, I came to a large pool in the river. On one side of the pool, there was a high rock. A stream of clear water fell from the top of the rock down into the pool. And suddenly, I wanted to climb to the top of that rock. I started climbing. The rock was steep and wet. Once I fell back into the deep pool. I had to start climbing again. At last, I got to the top of the rock and I was in a beautiful green valley. But I had injured my foot and I was very tired. I lay on the grass and I shut my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, I saw a young girl beside me. She was about 8 years old. "What's your name?" she asked. "How did you get into the valley?" She had a sweet voice and beautiful dark eyes and dark hair. "My name is John Ridd," I replied. "I've been fishing in the river." "Oh, you've injured your foot," the girl said. "It's bleeding. I'll tie some cloth around it." "It's all right," I said. "Please don't worry about my foot, but please tell me your name." "My name is Lorna. Lorna Doone," she replied. "Didn't you know that?" Suddenly the girl's voice was unhappy. Then she began to cry. I wanted to kiss her. After a moment, I did kiss her. The beautiful little girl stopped crying. "The Doones must not find you here," she said. "You must go. One of the men will see you. Then they'll kill both of us." "They'll kill us? Why, Lorna?" I asked. "This is the Doones Valley," she said. "And now you've found one of the secret entrances." Then she smiled. "I like you, John Ridd," she said. "Go now. Come here again one day, but please be careful." "I like you, Lorna," I said. "I like you as much as my sister, Annie." Suddenly we heard somebody shouting. Lorna's face became pale. "The men are looking for me, John," she said. "You must go, but you can't climb back down the rock." Then she pointed to a place on the side of the valley. "Do you see that hole in the rocks over there?" she said. "You can get out of the valley through that hole. Goodbye, John." I hid behind some trees. Lorna lay down on the grass, and she closed her eyes. Soon, 12 men came down the valley towards her. "Carver, here's our little girl," one of the men shouted. "She's asleep on the grass." Carver Doone walked up to Lorna. He was a big man. He lifted the beautiful little girl in his arms, and he carried her away. After a few minutes, I ran to the hole in the rocks. I climbed through it. Then I ran all the way to my home. 7 years passed. I grew bigger and stronger than any man on Exmoor. I often thought about Lorna, but I did not go to Dune Valley. I worked hard every day. I did not leave the farm very often, but we often had visitors at our house. Sometimes Tom Faggus visited us. Tom was my mother's cousin. I liked him very much. Tom was a good man. He had been a farmer once, but some rich men had taken his farm from him. After that, he became a robber. He became a highwayman. He stopped people on the roads and he took their money. He took their money, but he never hurt them, and he gave most of the money to poor people. Tom visited us every month. My sister, Annie, watched him carefully, and she listened to all of his stories. Tom fell in love with her, and she fell in love with him. One day, it was New Year's Day, 1683. Tom and I were riding on the hills together. Suddenly, Tom stopped his horse. "Look down there, John," he said. In a moment, we were both looking through a hole in the rocks. We were looking down into Dune Valley. I started to think about Lorna. I remembered her soft voice and her sweet smile. I remembered her beautiful dark eyes. And I remembered her sadness. Then Tom was speaking to me, but I wasn't listening. I had seen something in the valley. Something white was moving quickly along the valley. It was Lorna. That spring, I dreamt about Lorna often. And one day, I walked along the river to the high rock by the pool. I was a tall, strong young man. This time, I climbed to the top of the rock easily. In the green valley, birds were singing. I lay down and I closed my eyes. The grass was soft under my head. I heard Lorna's sweet voice a few minutes later. She was coming towards me and she was singing. She stopped near me and I opened my eyes. There were flowers in Lorna's hair. She was very beautiful. "Lorna Doone," I said. She remembered me, I knew that. But she smiled and she asked me a strange question. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "I'm John Ridd," I replied. "We met here 7 years ago. You were very kind to me. Don't you remember?" "Yes, I remember," Lorna said. "But don't you remember something, John Ridd? This is a dangerous place for you." Lorna was afraid. I looked at her big dark eyes, and suddenly I loved her. I loved her very much. At last I spoke. "Yes, it's a dangerous place for me," I said. "And you are afraid. Please don't be afraid, Lorna. I'll go now, but I will come back another day." Lorna smiled and I touched her white hand. Then we said goodbye. Chapter 4. The Sign. 2 weeks later, I saw Lorna again. I went into the valley and she took me to a secret cave near the pool. She told me more about herself. "Only 2 people talk to me," she said. "One is my grandfather, Sir Ensor Doone. The other is my servant, Gwenny. My father was Sir Ensor's eldest son. But I don't remember my mother or my father." "I'm not happy here, John," said Lorna. "The valley is beautiful, and Sir Ensor often says, 'One day, this valley will belong to you.' But I don't want to live with the dunes. All around me are robbers and murderers. I often come to this cave. I can be alone here." "Carver wants to marry me, John," Lorna said. "He's strong and brave, but he's a cruel man." She began to cry. "You must go now, John," she said. "But I want to see you again soon. Please make me a promise. Come to the valley often. Try to come every day. Sometimes I'll put a black coat over the white stone outside the cave. You'll see the coat from the hill above the valley. Then you must come to the cave. I'll be waiting for you. The coat will be our secret sign." I was very busy during the next 2 weeks. I worked very hard on the farm. Each day I went to the hill above Dune Valley, and each day I looked for Lorna's sign, but I did not see it. After 2 weeks, I had a visitor. One afternoon, a man rode up to the farm. He got off his horse. "I'm looking for John Ridd," he said to me. "You found him," I replied. "I'm John Ridd." "My name is Jeremy Stickles," the man said. "I'm one of the king's messengers. You must come with me to London, Mr. Ridd." The messenger gave me a letter. I opened it and I read it quickly. The letter was an order from one of the king's judges. I had to go to London. I had to tell the king's judge about the dunes. I was not happy about this. I did not want to leave my mother and sister at the farm, but I had to go. I asked Jan Fry to take care of the farm. It was a long and dangerous journey to London. Jeremy Stickles and I traveled for many days, but Jeremy told me many stories. Soon we were good friends. At last we arrived in London. I was going to talk to Judge Jeffreys, but the judge was a very busy man. I had to wait in London for 2 months, and I did not like the city. At last, the judge sent for me. I went to his house. "Who are you?" Judge Jeffreys asked me. "I'm John Ridd, sir," I replied. "I came from Exmoor 2 months ago. I came with Jeremy Stickles, the king's messenger." "You've come from Exmoor?" "Yes," said Judge Jeffreys. "Your neighbors are a family of robbers. Am I right?" "Yes, sir," I said. "My neighbors are the Dunes. They are robbers and murderers. There are about 40 of them." "40? Why aren't these Dunes in prison?" asked Judge Jeffreys. "Is the judge in Tiverton also a Dune?" I was surprised by this question and I did not reply. "No," said Judge Jeffreys. "The judge in Tiverton is not a Dune. I can see the answer in your face. Now, John Ridd, tell me another thing. Do you know any highwaymen? Do you know Tom Faggus?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "Tom is my cousin." The judge smiled. "Faggus is a good man," he said. "He has made mistakes, but he loves King Charles. John Ridd, do you and your friends love the king?" "We don't know much about him, sir," I said. "But we want him to be a good king." "Have you heard about any enemies of the king in Somerset, John?" asked Judge Jeffreys. "No, sir," I replied. Again, I was surprised. "I like you, John Ridd," said the judge. "You are an honest man. Stay away from the king's enemies, and stay away from the Dunes. I'll send someone to Exmoor soon. He will tell me about the king's enemies there, and he will find out more about the Dunes. Then we will put them in prison. Now go home, John." A week later, I was at home again. My mother and my sister were happy. I was happy too. But soon I wanted to see Lorna. I went to the hill above Dune Valley. I looked at the white rock. And there was Lorna's black coat. She had left me a sign. But when had she left it there? I went to the cave. Lorna heard me coming. She was waiting by the entrance. "I saw your sign," I said. "Are you in danger?" "Yes," she said. "I have put the coat there every day for 2 months. You did not come, John." "I'm sorry, Lorna," I said. "I've been in London. Come into the cave, John, Lorna said. People are watching me every day now. We must not stand here. We went into the cave. I had to ask Lorna a question. Do you love me, Lorna? I asked her. I like you very much, John, she replied. But the Dunes want me to marry Carver. Sir Ensor wants me to marry Carver. Grandfather saw one of the other men looking at me, and he was angry. You must marry Carver, he said to me. I have chosen him for you, but you are young. He must wait. But Carver doesn't want to wait, and now he watches me all the time. And one day, Grandfather will die. Nobody will help me then. Does anybody help you now? I asked. Gwenny, my servant, helps me, Lorna replied. She knows about you, John. I told her about you. She knows about our meetings. After that, I told Lorna about my journey to London. I told her about Judge Jeffreys and his plans. I won't leave you again, Lorna, I said. Then I gave her a little present. I had bought it for her in London. It was a ring with a blue stone. Lorna cried for a minute, but I put the ring on her finger and she stopped crying. She smiled and she kissed me. Then she took the ring off her finger. I can't wear this now, John, she said. But one day I will wear it for you. Please take care of it for me. And now, go home, John. Stay away from this place. I will send a message to you soon. Chapter 5. The Message. I went to our meeting place the next morning and Lorna was waiting for me. Oh, John, she said. I am a prisoner in the house now. Carver watches me all the time. Lorna, do you love me? I asked. I love you, Lorna, and I want to marry you. I do love you, John, Lorna said. But we can never get married. We met in the cave the next morning, and the next. But after that, Lorna did not come to our secret place. What had happened to her? I did not know, but I was very worried about her. One day, I made a plan. I will go to her house tonight, I thought. I will go into the valley through the Dune Gate. The Dune Gate was at the end of the valley. It was not one of the secret entrances to the valley. Sometimes people from Exmoor had to visit one of the Dunes houses. They went into the valley through the Dune Gate, but it was a dangerous place. There were always 2 guards with guns outside the gate. That night, I was lucky. I went to the gate after dark. The 2 guards were drinking brandy and they were arguing. And soon they began to fight. I did not have to speak to them. I moved quickly past them in the darkness, and they did not see me. I found Sir Ensor's house. Lorna lived there. I knew that. But which was the window of her room? I did not know. I was afraid, and I did not call her name. I waited in the dark, near the house. After an hour, Lorna suddenly opened a window. She put her head out of the window and she looked sadly at the moon. Was she thinking of me? I called to her quietly and she looked down at me. John, she said, are you mad? I wanted to see you, I said. Why are you a prisoner here, Lorna? My grandfather is very ill, she replied. He will die very soon. I can't leave the house. Gwenny can't leave the house. The men watch us. My grandfather will die. Then I will have to marry Carver. I'm in danger here, John. You must help me. There is a very tall tree behind you, Lorna said. Do you see it? You will be able to see it from the hill outside the valley. Look at it every day. There are some birds' nests in it. There are 7 of them. One day, Gwenny will climb the tree and take away one of the nests. Then you must come immediately. I will be in very great danger. The next morning, I told my mother about Lorna. Yes, my son, she said. One day soon, Sir Ensor will die. Lorna will be in great danger, but she must not marry Carver Doone. He is a murderer. You must bring Lorna here, John. We will take care of her. And every day after that, I went to the hill above Doone Valley. I looked at the tall tree. One day there were only 6 nests in it. I went home and waited until the evening. Then I went up onto the hill again. Suddenly, I saw somebody coming towards me. It was Lorna's servant, Gwenny. Sir Ensor Doone is dying, Mr. Ridd, she said. He wants to talk to you. Chapter 6. Snow on the Moor. The next morning, I told my mother about Lorna. Yes, my son, she said. One day soon Sir Ensor will die. Lorna will be in great danger, but she must not marry Carver Doone. He is a murderer. You must bring Lorna here, John. We will take care of her. And every day after that, I went to the hill above Doone Valley. I looked at the tall tree. One day, there were only 6 nests in it. I went home, and I waited until the evening. Then I went up onto the hill again. Suddenly, I saw somebody coming towards me. It was Lorna's servant, Gwenny. Sir Ensor Doone is dying, Mr. Ridd, she said. He wants to talk to you. I followed Gwenny down the hill and through Doone Valley. We arrived at Sir Ensor Doone's house. Lorna was waiting for me. I put my arms around her. Then she took me into a large room and she left me there. A very old man with white hair and black eyes was sitting in a big chair. He looked at me carefully. Are you John Ridd? He asked. Yes, sir, I replied. Are you feeling better, sir? John Ridd. Why do you meet Lorna? The old man asked. I love her, sir, I replied. I'm a farmer, and Lorna comes from a rich family. I know that. But the Ridds have been honest men for hundreds of years, and the Doones have been robbers and murderers for 40 years. I had spoken foolishly. Sir Ensor will be angry with me now, I thought. But my words were true, and the old man was not angry. He spoke quietly and sadly. You must make me a promise, John Ridd, he said. You must never meet Lorna again, and you must never speak to her again. Now bring her here to me. I found Lorna and I took her back to Sir Ensor. The old man saw my arm around her shoulders. He saw her hand in my hand. You young fools, he said. We'll be happy fools together, sir, I said. Lorna kissed me. Then she said, I love him, grandfather. Then be fools together, the old man said. I cannot help you. His voice was very tired. I said goodbye to Lorna, and I left the house. A few weeks later, Sir Ensor Doone died. A lot of snow fell on Exmoor that winter. The snow was very deep, and everything on the moor was white. I worried about Lorna. Was she warm and dry? Did she have enough food? I wanted to go to her. The Doones will not travel in this weather, I thought. I will go to the valley today. Nobody will see me. I will be safe. That evening, I took our sledge and I pulled it over the frozen ground. I pulled it down into Dune Valley. I went through the hole in the rocks. It was a difficult journey in the snow, but at last I was standing in front of Lorna's house. I knocked on the door and Gwenny opened it. Inside the house, Lorna was lying in a chair. Her face was pale, and she was very weak. "John, you've come to see me," she said quietly. "I'm in trouble, John. Grandfather died and Carver wanted to marry me immediately. I said no. Now the men won't give us any food. We're prisoners here." "You must both come home with me," I said. "You must come now. Mother, Annie, and I will take care of you both." I lifted Lorna in my arms, and Gwenny followed us outside to the sledge. Lorna lay on the sledge, and soon we began our journey through the night. I pulled the sledge, and Gwenny walked beside me. After 2 hours, we arrived at my farm. My mother and sister met us near the house, and we carried Lorna inside. We gave her and Gwenny some good hot food. My mother looked at Lorna. "Sweet child," she said, "you are welcome here." Lorna smiled. "Thank you," she said. "You have saved my life." More snow fell during the next few days. "The weather will be better soon," I told my mother. "Then the dunes will search for Lorna. They will come here. We must be ready for them." But after the snow, there was heavy rain. It fell for many days. The snow turned to water, and the Lynn River ran fast through Dune Valley. Horses could not cross the river. Nobody could leave the valley. Nobody could come for Lorna. Chapter 7. The Fight at the Farm. One rainy day, Tom Faggus arrived at our farm. He wanted to see Annie, and he brought some good news with him. "I've bought a farm," he said to Annie. "I'm going to be an honest man from today." Then he looked at my mother. "And I want to marry Annie, Mrs. Ridd," he said to her. "We will be happy together." Mother and I were not surprised. Tom loved Annie, and she loved him. We knew that. We were all happy that day. Then I told Tom about my love for Lorna, and I told him about Sir Ensor Doone and his family. "Lorna and Gwenny live with us now," I said. "They must never go back to the dunes." Tom left us the next morning, and the next evening, Jeremy Stickles arrived at our farm with some soldiers. He had returned to Somerset some weeks before. He told us about his work on Exmoor. "Judge Jeffreys sent me here," he said. "I am looking for enemies of the king, and I am finding out more about the dunes. But last night, 3 of the dunes attacked us. They shot one of my soldiers." The king's messenger and his soldiers rested at the farm. We gave them some food. Then I told Jeremy about Lorna. "You have done well, John," Jeremy said. "But the Dunes are evil people. Carver Doone and his men will come for Lorna soon. They will try to take her, and they will try to kill you. You will have to fight them. I must leave tomorrow, but 6 of my soldiers will stay here with you." A few days later, I arrived home late in the evening. I had been working in my fields all day. The doors and windows of the house were locked. I called Jan Fry, and he let me in. The women were very frightened. "What's happened?" I asked them. This afternoon I went into the garden, Lorna replied. Suddenly, I saw Carver Doone standing near the trees. He was watching me, and he was holding a gun. I was afraid. For a minute, I couldn't move. Then Carver lifted his gun. He shot at the ground near my feet. He wanted to frighten me. Then he shouted a message, Lorna said. He shouted, "You must come back to us tomorrow. We are going to kill John Ridd. You must help us." I ran back to the house, and we locked the door and the windows. Carver was not going to wait until the next day. I knew that. The Doones were going to come that night. I had a plan. I told the soldiers about it. Then I spoke to the women. Mother, Annie, and Lorna must stay in the house with the soldiers. I said, "Gwenny, come with me." Gwenny and I went into the garden. I hid behind a wall in the garden, and Gwenny climbed a tree near the river. I could see her from my hiding place. Gwenny watched for the Doones. After an hour, she saw them. She climbed down the tree and came to me. 10 men are crossing the river now, she said quietly. Carver is leading them. Go into the house now, I said. Tell the soldiers about the Doones, then stay inside the house. I watched the gate in our garden wall. After a few minutes, the Doones came. They broke down the gate, then they rode into the garden. "Kill every man in the house," said the voice of Carver Doone. "Then burn the house. Burn it to the ground. But remember this, Lorna belongs to me. Nobody must touch her." I lifted my gun. I can kill Carver now, I thought. But Carver could not see me, and I had never killed a man. I could not do it. I waited. Suddenly Carver moved away. I ran to the house. Then the soldiers started shooting at the Doones. 2 more Doones fell to the ground, and the others stood still. They put their hands above their heads. I walked towards Carver. 2 of the soldiers were pointing their guns at him. Suddenly, he tried to lift his own gun, but I pushed him down onto the ground and I took his gun from him. The other Doones saw this, and they started to run away. 2 of them got to their horses, but the Reading soldiers killed 3 more of them. Carver got up and ran to his own horse. He rode after the other men. He shouted at them. He wanted them to attack us again. At that moment, Jeremy arrived at the farm. I told him about the fight. I wanted to ride after the Doones. "No, John," Jeremy said. "You will be in danger. There are more Doones on the other side of the river." We did not chase Carver and his men, but the Doones had lost a fight. That was something new. Chapter 8: The Truth About Lorna. A few days later, Jeremy Stickles told me a strange story. It was late in the evening. The women had gone to bed. "John, I must tell you something," Jeremy said. "You won't like it, but you must hear it." "Tell me, Jeremy," I said. "Yesterday, I was riding back from Dulverton," Jeremy said. "It was late in the afternoon and I was tired. I wanted to rest, and I wanted some food. I stopped at an inn near the sea. The owner of the inn was a woman with black hair and dark eyes. She told me her name. It was Benita. She was an Italian, and she told me the story of her life. Many years ago, Benita worked for an Englishman's family," Jeremy said. The family, a man, his wife, and his young daughter, lived in Rome. Benita was the family's servant. They were a rich family. They owned a lot of land in Scotland. There had been an argument about some of the land, an argument between the man and his cousin. There had been a trial, and the cousin had lost all his land. Benita often traveled through Europe with this family, Jeremy said. But one day, the man fell from his horse and he died. This happened in France. For 6 months after that, the man's wife stayed in France. But at last, she brought the little girl back to England, said Jeremy. And Benita came with them. The family owned a house in Watchet. The 3 of them were going to live there. One November afternoon, they were traveling in their coach, said Jeremy. They were on the road to Watchet. They were near the sea. Suddenly, the driver of the coach saw some men on horses. They were waiting next to a big rock. They had guns. They were going to attack the coach. The driver drove the coach onto the sand and towards the sea. He tried to escape from the robbers, but the robbers followed on their horses. The wheels of the heavy coach went deep into the sand. The coach could not move quickly. The lady in the coach saw an old man riding with the robbers. She spoke to Benita. She said, "I know that man. He is Sir Ensor Doone, my husband's cousin. He is our family's enemy." Then she asked the driver to go faster. After a moment, the coach was in the sea, but the waves of the sea turned the coach onto its side. And then, something hit Benita's head. Later, Benita opened her eyes, Jeremy said. She was very cold. She was lying on the sand, and the rich lady was sitting on a rock nearby. The Doones had gone, and the little girl had gone too. Benita and the coach driver took the lady to her house in Watchet, said Jeremy. But she soon died. What happened to the little girl? I asked. And why did Benita stay in Somerset? The Doones took everything from the coach, Jeremy answered. Benita had no money. She could not go back to Italy. She stayed here, and she married a man from Dulverton. What happened to the little girl? I asked again. Can't you guess that, John? Jeremy said. The little girl was Lorna. Then I remembered the day after my father's death, November 29th, 1673. Jan Fry had taken me home from school that day. We had seen a coach near Dulverton. I remembered the people in the fine coach, the lady, her servant, and the pretty little girl. And I remembered another thing. That night, I had seen the Doones riding on the moor. One of them had been holding a child on his horse. Who were Lorna's parents? I asked. Their names were Lord and Lady Dougal, Jeremy answered. The Dougals were one of the richest families in England. John, you must tell Lorna the truth about her family. She is not a Doone. She is Lady Lorna Dougal. Chapter 9. Lorna has forgotten me. The next morning, Lorna was sitting in the garden. She was reading a book. I sat down beside her. I have to tell you something, Lorna, I said. Soon, you'll know the truth about your family. Will you say, "Go away, John Ridd"? Will you forget about me? Lorna laughed. She said, or will I say, "John Ridd, I love you"? What do you want to tell me, John? I want to tell you about your mother and your father, I said. Lorna, you are not a Doone. Your father was not Sir Ensor's son. Your father was Lord Dougal. He died in France. You were very young, Lorna. I had to tell Lorna about her family, but I was afraid. The Dougals are a rich and important family. I thought. Will Lorna want to marry a farmer now? Your mother died soon after your father, I said. But she died in Somerset. The Dunes attacked her. They took you away from her. Lorna's face became pale. I told her Jeremy's story. For a few minutes she cried for her dead parents. Then she put her arms around me and she kissed me. My dear John, she said, I don't remember my parents. I have you, and I want only you. I love you. I looked at Lorna's clear, bright eyes. I wanted to believe her, but I was afraid. I was afraid, but at last I understood Carver Dune's plan. The Dunes were the enemies of Lorna's family. They had taken Lorna from her mother. They knew about her parents, but they had not told her about them. Yes, Carver wanted to marry Lorna, but he did not love her. He wanted her land and her money. He wanted the Dunes to have the Dougal's land again. Soon after that day, Tom Faggus and my sister Annie got married. They lived at Tom's farm, and they were very happy together. I wanted to marry Lorna. I dreamt of happiness with her. But then something terrible happened. I came home one evening, and Lorna had gone. My mother told me the news. She was angry. Lady Lorna Dougal and Gwenny have gone to London, she said. Lorna left a letter for you. I ran to Lorna's room and I found the letter. Dear John, I read, you will always be in my heart, but I must leave you now. I belong to a different world. Goodbye, my dear John. I love you. I read those words and I wanted to believe them, but I was very unhappy. I shall never see Lorna again, I thought. In January 1685, Mother and I heard some news. The king's soldiers were going to take the Dunes to the judges. At last, the judges were going to punish them. But the soldiers did not come. In February, King Charles died. Immediately there was trouble in the country. Prince James, the dead king's brother, became the next king. But many people in England did not like him. Fighting started in many parts of the country. Many people in Somerset were enemies of the new king. Suddenly, there were many soldiers on Exmoor, but they were fighting King James's enemies. They could not fight the Dunes too. I waited for news from Lorna, but no letters came from her. Soldiers from London often came to our farm. Sometimes they talked about Lorna. She is a famous lady now, they said. Many rich young men want to marry her. Lorna has forgotten me, I thought sadly. Chapter 10. After the Battle. One day, Annie came to the farm. She and Tom Faggus had been married for more than a year. They had a baby boy. That day, Annie brought the child with her to our farm. My sister was crying. "Oh, John," she said, "Tom has gone away. He is going to fight against King James's soldiers. You must find him for me. You must bring him back to us." "I can't leave the farm," I said. "The Dunes will attack it. Carver and his men will burn it down. I must stay here. I must take care of Mother." But I loved my sister, and I wanted to help her, and I did not want Tom to die. Early the next morning, I left the farm. I traveled for 4 days. In each town, I asked people for news of Tom. On the 5th day, I arrived in the town of Bridgewater. It was a Sunday evening. The date was the 4th or 5th of July. The town was full of angry men. All of them wanted to fight King James's soldiers, and the soldiers were nearby. I was tired. I went to an inn for the night, but very early in the morning I woke up. The sound of guns woke me. There was a battle, and it was not far away. Was Tom Faggus fighting there? It was about 4 o'clock. I put on my clothes and I went to the stable. I got onto my horse and I rode out of the town, towards the sounds of the battle. Soon I came to a small village. The king's soldiers had left the village, but their cooking fires were still burning. I rode on, and after a few minutes, I came to the battle. The noise from the guns was terrible. The screams of dying men were terrible too. Men with blood and dirt on their faces were running away from the battlefield, but many lay on the ground. Most of them were dead. The king's soldiers had won the battle. I got off my horse and I helped a dying man. I gave him some water. Then a strange thing happened. A horse without a rider came towards me. It pushed its head against my neck. I knew that horse. She was Tom's horse, Winnie. She looked down at me. Then she turned and began to walk away slowly. Winnie wants me to follow her, I thought. So I got back onto my horse and I followed her. She led me to an old building on a farm. I went inside the building. Tom Faggus was lying on the floor. His shoulder was badly injured. There was blood on his clothes. I quickly cut a piece of cloth from my coat and I tied it around Tom's injured shoulder. Then I gave him some water. He drank it slowly. Is Winnie injured? Tom asked me. No, she isn't injured, Tom, I replied. Please lift me onto her back, John, said Tom. She's a fast horse. She'll take me home safely. I took Tom outside, and I lifted him carefully onto Winnie's back. I'll be safe now, Tom said. No horse can run as fast as Winnie. I watched Winnie taking Tom away. Then I lay down in the old building, and I slept for many hours. Suddenly, I woke up. There were men standing around me. They were the king's soldiers. Stand up, one of them said. He pointed his gun at me. You are one of the king's enemies. No, I'm not one of the king's enemies, I said. I love the king. But the soldiers did not believe me. Take him outside and shoot him, another soldier said. The king's enemies must die. That is the law. The soldiers put a rope around my hands and arms, and they pushed me out of the building. They threw me onto the ground. They were going to shoot me. I thought about Lorna and about my mother. I loved them very much. The soldiers lifted their guns, but suddenly, a man on a horse rode between me and the soldiers' guns. It was Jeremy Stickles. Wait, Jeremy shouted to the soldiers. Don't shoot. Then he spoke to me. John Ridd, you are my prisoner now, he said. Jeremy took the rope from my arms, and we both got onto our horses. We rode away from the farm. Thank you, Jeremy, I said. You saved my life. The Dunes attacked my soldiers at your farm, said Jeremy. You helped my men that day, and now I've helped you. But you are in danger, John. The soldiers will tell the judges about you. You must go to Judge Jeffreys in London. You must tell him your story. Chapter 11. At Lord Brandier's house, I was in London for 2 months. During that time, I met Judge Jeffreys again. The judge remembered me. He listened to my story and he believed me. And after 5 weeks, I saw Lorna. Lorna was living at the home of her uncle, Lord Brandir. Lord Brandir was the brother of Lorna's dead mother. He was an old man, and he was a friend of King James. He lived in a large house in Kensington near London with many servants. I wanted to see Lorna very much. Does she remember me? I asked myself. Does she still love me? Many people talked about the beautiful Lady Lorna Dougal. I learnt many things about her. Many rich and important young men wanted to marry her, and Queen Mary liked her very much. The two women often met and talked together, and on Sundays they went to a church in London together. One Sunday, I went to the church. I sat in a corner of the church and I waited for Lorna. After some minutes, King James and Queen Mary entered the church. Many great lords and ladies followed them, and then Lorna came in. She was wearing a white dress. She was very beautiful. I loved her more than ever. Suddenly, Lorna turned her head and she saw me. She smiled. Then she sat down next to the Queen. She was once my friend, Lorna Doone, I thought. But now she's the Queen's friend, Lady Lorna Dougal. A few minutes later, a thin young man with yellow hair walked towards me. He said nothing, but he gave me a piece of folded paper. Then he went away. I opened the paper and I read the words on it. They were words of love, and they were from my dear Lorna. I ran out of the church. I was a happy man again. The next evening, I went to Kensington. I went to Lord Brandir's house. Lorna's servant, Gwenny, opened the door to me. She was angry with me. I did not know why. Gwenny took me to a little room. "Please wait here," she said. Lorna arrived a few minutes later. She held out her hand and I kissed it. "My dear John," she said quietly. "My dear Lorna," I said, "I love you very much. Why didn't you write to me?" "What do you mean, John?" said Lorna. "I did write to you. I gave the letters to Gwenny and—" Lorna stopped speaking. A moment later, she called Gwenny into the room. Lorna asked the servant some questions, and soon Gwenny was crying sadly. But we learned the truth about the letters. Gwenny had not sent them to me. She did not want Lorna to marry a farmer from Exmoor. She wanted her mistress to marry a rich man from London. She had hidden the letters. Lorna was very angry. She sent the servant away. "But is Gwenny right?" I asked Lorna. "People will say, 'Lorna Dougal is foolish. She wants to marry a farmer.' Do you want to marry me, Lorna? You will be happy at the farm. You will have nice clothes, and I'll always love you. But you won't be an important lady." "John, I thought about this a long time ago," Lorna answered. "I want you to be my husband. I've lived in London for a year now and I hate it. The women don't like me. The men are only interested in my money and my land. One day, I will be 21, John, and then I'll marry you. I'll marry you and we'll live on the farm at Orr. Please visit me often until then." Late one evening in September, I was leaving Lord Brandir's house. I saw 3 men standing near some trees. They were looking at the house. One of them was carrying some rope. Why are they here? I asked myself. What are their plans? Are they robbers? I watched the men until midnight. At midnight, the street was very dark, and no lamps were burning in Lord Brandier's house. Suddenly, I heard somebody calling softly to the three men. Then they walked quietly up to the house. Somebody inside the house opened a window near the street. The three men entered the house through the window. I moved quickly, and I followed them into the house. Inside the house, I saw a servant girl. She was carrying a lamp, and she was leading the three men up the stairs. I waited for a moment. Then I went upstairs too. The three men were standing outside Lord Brandier's bedroom. They did not see me. One of the men tried to open the bedroom door, but it was locked. The man quickly broke the lock. He made some noise, and the servant girl ran away. Then the three men went into Lord Brandier's bedroom. After a moment, I followed them to the door and I stood outside it. I looked into the bedroom. Lord Brandier was sitting up in his bed. One of the robbers had a gun. He was pointing it at Lord Brandier. The other two men were trying to open a large metal box. An hour later, 4 soldiers came to the house. They took the robbers away. Soon, the soldiers found out about the 3 men. They were enemies of Lord Brandier, and they were enemies of King James. The next morning, Lord Brandier told the king my story, and that afternoon, the king sent for me. I went to his palace, and a servant took me to a beautiful room. The king and queen were there. They smiled at me. "You are the great John Ridd," said Queen Mary. "Lady Lorna Dougal has told me about you." "John Ridd," said the king. "I thank you. You've done a great thing for me and for your country. And you've done a great thing for my friend, Lord Brandier." Then King James lifted a sword and he touched my shoulder with it. "From this moment, your name will be Sir John Ridd," he said. Chapter 12. We attacked the dunes. I left London after 2 months. I did not want to leave Lorna there, but I was worried about the farm. I wanted to go home. I wanted to see my mother and Jan Fry, and I wanted to see Annie, Tom, and their son. In December, I was at home on the farm. My family was happy, and I was happy too, and I wrote to Lorna very often. But that winter, there was more trouble on Exmoor. The dunes were making the trouble. Christopher Badcock was one of our neighbors. He was a farmer and he was a good man. One day in February, something terrible happened to his family. Carver and some of the other dunes went to the Badcock's house. Christopher was not there. He was working in his fields. But Christopher's wife was in the house with her young baby. Carver Doone pulled the baby from her arms, and he threw it onto the hard floor. The baby died immediately. Then the Doones took all the food and the money from the house, and they took Christopher's wife away with them. The men from the farms and villages on the moor were very angry. Some of them came to my farm. "We must stop this robbing and killing," they said. "We are going to attack the dunes. We want you to lead us, John." Tom Faggus joined us. He had a plan. "The dunes like gold," he said. "They like it very much. We'll tell them a story about some gold. We'll say, 'There's a lot of gold in the mine at Wizard's Cave. 4 men are going to take it across Exmoor on Friday night. The dunes will want that gold. Some of them will go to the mine late on Friday afternoon, and some of our men will be waiting for them. Then I and some of the other farmers will attack the dune gate, said Tom. There won't be many dunes in the houses in the valley. Most of them will be at the mine, but some of the men in the houses will run to the dune gate. They will try to help the guards there. At the same time, John and the rest of our men will attack the houses in the valley. You must attack the valley from the high rock, John, Tom said. You know that place. The water falls into the pool there. You first met Lorna there. Your men must burn all the dunes' houses. The dunes must leave Exmoor forever, alive or dead. It was a good plan. We started to tell people about the gold, and soon the dunes had heard about it. On Friday night, Jan Fry took his gun and he went to the hill above Dune Valley. He was listening for the sound of the fighting at Dune Gate. Soon, he heard it. Then he fired his gun. I was with some of our neighbors at the bottom of the high rock. We heard Jan's gun, and we started to climb the rock. We moved quickly forward into the valley. We ran between the trees, and the dunes did not see us coming. The men in the houses tried to fight us, but we quickly killed them. Then we took all the women and children outside, and we burnt the houses. Soon the valley was full of smoke and fire. Some of the dunes were fighting our men at the dune gate. They saw the flames, and they ran back towards their houses. My men began shooting at them. There was a long and terrible fight, but we killed them all. Later I heard the story of the battle at Wizard's Cave. Carver Doone was there with some of his men. Our men killed all the others, but Carver hid in the mine. Then he rode away on his horse. In the 3 battles of that night, the dunes killed 10 of our men. But more than 40 dunes died. In the morning, Carver was the only one of the dune men alive. Chapter 13. Lorna comes home. The next day, I was at the farm with my mother and Annie. Suddenly, I heard the sound of horses. I went to the door and I saw Jeremy Stickles. He was riding up to the farm with 3 of his soldiers. "John," Jeremy said, "I have some news for you. Lady Lorna Dougal is coming to see you. She is on her way now." I was very surprised. "Why is she coming here, Jeremy?" I asked. "You saved her life," Jeremy said. "Do you remember the night when you stopped the 3 robbers? They were enemies of Lord Brander. They were enemies of King James, too. After you left London, Lord Brander became ill. He died last week, and the king made Lorna a present. He gave her all of her uncle's money and land. She is a very rich lady now." Lorna arrived that afternoon. She was wearing beautiful clothes, but I was not interested in her clothes. I looked at her sweet, smiling face, and I was happy. "My dear John," she said, "I'm so glad to be here. I've come home to you." The next few months were the happiest months of my life. I loved Lorna very much, and I wanted to marry her. She loved me too, but I was not sure about her feelings. She was a rich and important lady. Did she really want to marry a farmer? One evening in June, I asked her a question. "My dear Lorna," I said, "will you be my wife? Will you marry me?" "Yes, John," she said. "I will marry you. I want to live on your farm. I want to work hard. I want to help you." I kissed her. "I'm the happiest man in England," I said. On the 29th of July, 1685, Lorna and I were married. The wedding was in Orr Church. Many people came to the church to see the beautiful Lady Lorna Dougal. The women all loved her, and the men all wanted her to marry them. But Lorna married me. It was a sunny day, and everybody was happy. Lorna and I stood in front of the altar. I held her hand, and she smiled at me. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. I turned, and I saw a man standing near the door. It was Carver Doone. He was pointing a gun at Lorna. He pulled the trigger. The gun made a terrible noise, and Lorna fell to the ground. Carver dropped the gun and ran out of the church. I picked up Lorna's body and carried her to the farm. "John," she said. "My dear John." Then she shut her eyes. She did not speak again. I was very unhappy. I went out of the house and I followed Carver's tracks. I followed them to Badgeworthy Water. Carver was standing near the water. When he saw me, he lifted his gun, but it was wet and it would not fire. "You've killed Lorna," I shouted. Carver tried to hit me, but I was stronger than him. We fought for a long time, but at last I knocked him to the ground. Then I carried him to the water. "This is for my father," I said, "and this is for Lorna." The water carried Carver away. He was dead. I walked back to the farm. Lorna is dead, I thought. My dear Lorna is dead. I went into the house. Lorna was lying on a bed. Suddenly she opened her eyes. She smiled at me. "John," she said, "I'm all right. I'm very weak, but I'm not going to die." I kissed her. Everybody was frightened of the Doones. Carver Doone had killed my father, but nobody had punished him. "One day I will kill him," I said to myself.